Welcome to this series, The Foundational Questions of Our Time, brought to you by Synergy Circles of the Evolutionary Leaders, specifically the Integral and Holistic Cosmology Synergy Circle and the Cornerstone Synergy Circle. These discussions feature global thought leaders dialoguing with renowned author Riane Eisler on how their transformational work relates to Dr. Eisler's four cornerstones of how we transform cultures from domination consciousness to partnership consciousness, crucial for these challenging times. I'm Dr. Kurt Johnson of Light on Light Publications and Media. Each video will engage Dr. Eisler in a discussion with a global thought leader introduced immediately after this initial introduction of Riane Eisler. Riane Eisler, JD, PhD, is a best-selling author, systems scientist, futurist, cultural historian, and attorney, whose work shows how to build a more equitable, sustainable, and less violent world. Her famous book, The Chalice and the Blade, Our History, Our Future, is now in 57 U.S. printings and 30 foreign editions. Dr. Eisler is president of the Center for Partnership Systems, CPS, and editor-in-chief of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies at the University of Minnesota. She is also the author of Nurturing Our Humanity, How Domination and Partnership Structure Our Brains, Lives, and Future, co-authored with anthropologist Dr. Douglas Fry, Oxford University Press, 2019. And The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economics, hailed by Nobel Peace Laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu as the template for the better world that we are so urgently seeking. In short, according to dictionaries, a domination hierarchy is a social hierarchy arising when interaction of members of a social system creates a ranking system. Such rankings of who are favored can involve gender, race, economic status, and so on. Dr. Eisler's four cornerstones of how we shift from domination consciousness to partnership consciousness are these, and we invite you to hear our first video with Dr. Eisler in which she elaborates these four elements. The first cornerstone is childhood. The second cornerstone is the attitude toward gender. The third cornerstone is economics, and the fourth cornerstone is story and language. So let's go over now to introduce our guest for this episode. Our guest for this episode is Steve Farrell. Steve Farrell is the co-founder of Humanity's Team, the world's largest not-for-profit online transformation education platform, and a leader in the conscious business movement. His personal journey is recounted in the inspiring recent autobiography, A New Universal Dream, My Journey from Silicon Valley to a Life in Service to Humanity, which Kirkus Reviews called an absorbing and convincing work of futurist vision. Steve is co-creator of the Conscious Business Declaration, the Conscious Business Online Summit, and the Conscious Business Enterprise, which has led to such initiatives as the Conscious Business Publications, Masterclasses, the Evolutionary Leaders Conscious Business Synergy Circle, Conscious Business Change Agent Training, and most recently, the master's degree program in conscious business with Ubiquity University. Steve also contributed the chapter Dawn of a Conscious Business Movement in the Gold Nautilus Award-winning book from the Evolutionary Leaders, Our Moment of Choice, Evolutionary Visions, and Hope for the Future. Steve co-founded Humanity's Team in 2003 with Neil Donald Walsch, author of the New York Times longtime best-selling book series, Conversations with God. And today, Steve is worldwide executive director of Humanity's Team, focused on helping people throughout the world awaken to their deeper selves and the interconnectedness of everything. Today, Humanity's Team has approximately 700,000 friends in over 150 countries and has pioneered such popular and important international events as the annual Global Oneness Day and the Global Oneness Summit. So over now to Steve Farrell and Riane Eisler. Well, welcome Steve Farrell and Riane Eisler, who we've just told you so much about. So let's begin right away with our discussion. So Riane, you're famous for your work concerning how our world moves from dominance consciousness and dominance cultures to partnership consciousness and partnership cultures. And Steve, in your many publications and public events, you've said that business is the most potent force on earth. And the question is whether it will continue on a destructive path of just serving personal and special interest gains, or become conscious of the context of interconnection and interdependence, and take the kind of direction that could build a world that works for all. So as a brief opener from both of you, could you both take a turn talking about how important economics and business are regarding our world future, and both what the problems have been and generally what needs to be addressed in the future for a healthy and thriving world. So we'll start with Steve, and then we can ask Riane to follow.
Well, I first want to say it's a total pleasure to be here with you, Riane and Kurt. And Riane, you're, of course, such a pioneer in this field, and it's wonderful to be with you. When we launched Humanity's Team 20 years ago, your work we studied very carefully and thoughtfully. So I want to just share that as we get started. Business is the most powerful institution on the planet. Years ago, of course, it was the church. But no longer. Today, it's business. And so one of the metaphors that we use is that business is sort of the lead car on the train, and it's pulling the train, which is humankind here, our species on this planet. Which means that if business pulls the train in an unhealthy direction, as is primarily the case now, that's big trouble for this planet as we talk about creating a sustainable and flourishing world. What kinds of things have gone wrong? As we know, it's been very Newton Darwinian, this whole sort of top line, bottom line thing. Of course, my background is business. I came from Silicon Valley myself, which is all about top line and bottom line growth. In fact, hyper growth. There's nothing wrong with growth, but that can't be where that is where that's our yardstick, where that's our destination. Then it's a cancer, and we can see that in today's world. Now, fortunately, science is affirming that we have this world that is in fact a universe, a multiverse that is interdependent, that is interconnected. In fact, that it's one. Yeah, there's all kinds of science out that's affirming this. Not a lot of people in the mainstream haven't necessarily looked carefully at this, but the Nobel Prize for Physics in October of last year for entanglement, where these three researchers won the Nobel Prize. Entanglement, if you look up the definition, is where you've got two objects in the universe with no physical connection, deeply affecting each other. So when we talk about interconnected and interdependent as one, yes. And of course, this is just one example. There are so many examples. The good work of Greg Braden and Bruce Lipton and the Resonance Science Foundation, and really on and on. Dean Radin with ions. There's so much research that is coming in that's affirming what Albert Einstein shared, so many years ago, 102 years ago in 1921. Albert Einstein said the greatest illusion in the world is the illusion of separation. And then he went on his longer quote that most of us are familiar with, that this is creating this optical delusion, as he called it, is creating this prison for us, which is causing us to have an affinity for those closest to us, those few. And so he says our job must be to free ourselves from this prison by embracing the whole of humankind and the planet. And this is really the work of humanity's team. He put his finger precisely on the problem, and then he put his finger precisely on the solution. That was 102 years ago. Now, and then he also said that no problem can be solved at the level that it was created. So as we look at this top line, bottom line growth problem, what I'm calling a cancer and so on, he's saying we have to elevate consciousness actually to go up and solve that problem, which I think is true, because these things, as we call attention to the cancer of bottom and top line growth, the cancer of just of not stewarding this planet well, of fouling our planet, of CO2 emissions, which is causing, my gosh, look at the drumbeat right now. It's we were sharing actually in the green room before we came out. It's scary, this drumbeat, as we look at the severe weather conditions, the now talking about Atlantic currents. It's scary. It really is. I have an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. And I've had a nice life. And as we look at our children and future generations, my God, it's our time to act. Now, fortunately, I mentioned, Riane is a huge pioneer, been out here for all these years, calling attention to it. Kurt, you're doing the same kind of good work. Humanities team also with our different programs, and we're making good strides. We are in the middle, I believe, of the Great Awakening, of this great shift, of this pivot to a new way of living and working on the planet. Of course, I said here, business is primarily in this top line, bottom line growth thing, but strides have been made in this area of conscious business, and candidly, there are huge strides we need to continue to make, huge strides. So we're really just getting started. Regenerative agriculture, I believe, seems to be the area where conscious business is making the greatest strides, where billions of dollars now are going into, because the soil and farmland really was starting to degenerate from these practices that where we were bringing in fertilizers and things that were eroding the soil and actually creating plant life that wasn't, when harvested, wasn't always healthy to eat for people. And regenerative farming, where we're bringing in animals and water systems that are where we're creating health and well-being for the farmland, and where investors are excited about that, where they're looking at returns that are a little different. Wow, that's really starting to point the way. This is what we need to do in conscious business on a larger scale. I know we're going to go deeper into all of this, but that might be my way of getting this started.
Yeah, so Steve, thanks so much. It's a great start. So Riane.
Well, first of all, I too want to say what a pleasure it is to be with you, Steve, and how many commonalities there really are between what you're working on and what I and the Center for Partnership Systems have been working on for decades now. And I want to say that what we're moving toward as we move towards recognizing our interconnectedness is to look at the whole system. Because economics, business doesn't just pop up in a vacuum. It is like families, like education, etc., politics, economic reward systems. It's embedded in a larger social and cultural system. So I think I'm going to tell you just a little bit about how I see, first of all, our work really, the commonalities in our work. What I am interested in is whole systems change. And you mentioned that business economics is a major engine. It's sort of the cart driving us. So my focus in my book on economics as a real wealth of nations has been looking at what would a system look like in which interconnection and a certain kind of interconnection, a caring interconnection, is rewarded rather than marginalized as it is in both capitalist and socialist theory, as well as in our economic indicators. So I'll get right to the core of this, because as you know, my work has identified 4 cornerstones that either underlie what I call domination systems. We're all very familiar with this top-down, fear-based to a very large extent system. And there's a sort of a scale. I've introduced the partnership domination social scale. At one end is the domination system, at the other end is the partnership system. No society is a completely pure one or the other. But what we're seeing today in our world is a massive struggle between the 2 systems. And it's only being reported really in bits and pieces. And it is the 4 cornerstones that I mentioned are, first of all, something that's ignored or marginalized in most analysis: childhood and family. The second is gender. And gender really is sort of the primary way that we, regardless of whether we're in the Middle East or whether we're here or whether we're in Europe or in Africa, there's a commonality, which is societies that think in terms of in-group versus out-group thinking, rather than our interconnection with one another. They all have this gendered stereotypes, very rigid gender roles, in which one form of humanity, the male form, is considered superior to and entitled to dominate and be served by the other fundamental form of humanity, the female form. And of course, the movement towards gender fluidity is actually an important partnership trend. Why? Because it really frontally challenges the gender stereotypes. I mean, how can you rank one over the other if you don't have these rigid expectations, and you either this or this, and stay in your place, or you better, or else. The third, and this is what we're really going to focus on, even though they're all very interconnected, is economics. But not just business, but because business is in the markets. It's really exchange of goods, of services, etc. But also an economic system that I propose, which is very different from what we have, that no longer excludes the 3 life-sustaining sectors, which both capitalist and socialist theory completely ignore: the natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and the household economy. Once you have a complete economic map that no longer marginalizes these 3 sectors, and with it the so-called women's work of caring for people, starting at birth and keeping a clean and healthy environment, which of course translates into keeping a clean and healthy planetary environment, right? It's caring. Once caring is part of the reward activity, then it isn't a question of, do we have markets? Of course we need a free market. We don't happen to have one. And of course we need enlightened government policies. And what I'm really, and I'm going to close in a moment, but what I'm really suggesting is that what this analysis shows is that the argument between capitalism and socialism is a distraction. Because both capitalism and socialism came out of early industrial times, 1700s, the 1800s. We are now in the 21st century post-industrial era. So by just that, it would be an antiquated way to have these two operating systems still being the only solution. But it's much more than that, because, as I said, while both capitalism and socialism actually challenged traditions of domination, the mercantilism was challenged by Smith, and then, of course, Marx challenged the bourgeoisie, the robber barons of that day. But both perpetuated what I call the hidden system of gendered values. Remember what I said, that the four are interconnected and has nothing to do with anything related to women and men. I mean, here we have two very caring men. My deceased husband was a very caring man, and we all know women who have, well, I mean, they have internalized this worldview, of the ranking of one difference over the other, starting with that fundamental difference in our species, to the extent that they, they'll vote for strongman rule, or it's a mess completely. But what I'm trying to say is that both perpetuated a system of values in which anything that in domination systems, which, by the way, are only 5,000 to 10,000 years old, which was the subject of my first two books, of The Chalice and the Blade and Sacred Pleasure, where I was trying to figure out, how did we get to this mess? And does it have to be this way, for goodness sakes? And the answer is a resounding no. But you mentioned Einstein, as he mentioned, and I love that quote from him: we cannot solve problems with the same consciousness that created them. And if our consciousness, and that's true of people who think of themselves as progressives, just as much as of people who are regressing towards wanting to push us back to the domination side, we have all been taught to marginalize nothing less than the majority of humanity, women and children, and with this, families. And we know from neuroscience, and this is where I'm going to stop here, that actually it isn't, this whole argument between nature and nurture, again, it's a distraction. Just like the argument between capitalism and socialism is a complete distraction, because we know that nothing less from neuroscience, my last book, came out with Oxford University Press in 2019, Nurturing Our Humanity, brings together with this new frame of the partnership domination social scale what we know from neuroscience, that what children observe and experience, especially in their very early years, impacts nothing less than our brains. And with it, how we feel, how we think, how we act, including how we vote. And so when we're talking about economics, and this is really what I wanted to do, I want to frame it in a system in which both capitalism and socialism perpetuated this system of values where the work of care was coded feminine, and actually in certainly in Smith's time, and still in Marx's time, was to be performed for free by a woman in a male-controlled household. So they have classified the three life-sustaining sectors as outside economics, as just reproductive rather than productive. And you know what? GDP and GNP perpetuate that false model. And I see you're shaking your head, yes.
Yeah, and that's actually why I'm going to actually, because I know Steve referenced when they founded Humanities Team, they were so familiar with your work, and I saw Steve taking notes and nodding his head. So I want to give chance for Steve to respond to that before we even move on to our next discussions question. So Steve, you just heard a lot. Feel free to comment back to Riane.
Yeah, what a beautiful setting of the table, Riane. Yeah, there's so much there, compacted history and perspective, and also discussion around what is the solution. And you started with, this whole system view, which is, of course, what we've got to come to, a whole system view, where we see this holistic fractal universe. So let me come in with something that just, I think, relates to this, at least insofar as kind of how do we get to where we're going? How does this shift happen if we're going to elevate consciousness? If there's another level of consciousness which creates the solution, what does that look like? And this is really the premise of my book, which the book, A New Universal Dream, it covers a 50+ year history of me from a teenager, a single divorced mom, 6 siblings, living in a little home, to finding myself in the center of wealth in Silicon Valley, and then being called, to this conscious journey, this conscious path that I'm sure all of our viewers are a part of. That's why you're watching. And then the work of Humanities Team, etc. Now, so that's kind of the arc of it, those 3 stages. But there are 3 premises really that the book comes to, which I think science and spirituality are building the bridge that really reflect these 3 premises. So the first one is that there's a universal consciousness that is animating and permeating all of life. And again, I brought in just a moment ago the science. Science is just pouring on now with this understanding that Albert Einstein, so many years ago, just really nailed it in terms of what the problem was, this optical delusion, our eyes deceiving us, because quantum physics is bringing in, my gosh, there's actually what I'm calling a universal consciousness, or universal presence, or universal loving presence. We could call it lots of things. I'm going to call it universal consciousness animating and permeating all of life, because a lot of people can really get there. I can speak to a lot of people from where they are with that. Now, and these premises follow one after the other after the other. The second one is that, again, and science is affirming this, that we are designed to be a part of this universal consciousness. We're like a cell in a body, and that's that is an actually accurate statement. We're all cells in the body of this one consciousness that animates and permeates all of life, which means 8 billion faces, and the face of the earth, and the face of animal and plant life. All of life actually fits into this universal consciousness. We're designed that way. So now there are many implications in this that I won't try and get to, but let me get to just a couple. One, that means that there's connection, right? Because we're designed to be part of it. Where there's connection and we're mature, that almost always leads to responsibility. And where we're mature, that almost always leads to positive action. So right now, just as Einstein shared in the longer quote that I didn't read, that means we're putting the fence posts around the nuclear family, that we're connected. So there's a responsibility within the family, and we're taking positive action. Well, now with quantum physics, those fence posts are getting moved way out to the whole of the earth, actually the whole of the universe. Now, we have free will, and we don't have to live into that if we don't want to. But science is saying, no, this is ultimate reality. That just like Einstein said, we've been walking around kind of in an optical delusion, not really understanding the nature of ultimate reality. And when we do, these things naturally happen. Well, we can't do everything, but all of us can do something. So, and when we go to this spiritual, that still small voice within us, most of us can relate to that. For me, it's actually more of a feeling than a voice, but where we go there and we feel into it, we're called to something. So just as we were, the pioneering work that you're doing, Riane, the incredible work that you've been doing, Kurt, the work I was called to in Humanities Team. So all of us are actually called to it, and where we can just phase out that worldly noise around us, not pay attention to it, and instead pay attention to the still small voice that's telling us and that's guiding us and supporting us. then we go right straight to, we live the life actually we were invited to live, I think. So one other implication of this is that I'll bring in, which goes at this whole dominator model thing, which Riane, you so accurately portray and bring through in your book with research and perspectives and things, is that if it's a holistic fractal universe, if we're designed to be part of the one, well, bodies always love that which is its parts. So it's cells and organs. A body does, just like our own body. We love, the body that we inhabit. And where there's health and well-being, usually the cells and organs, those parts of the body, that's where it's holistic, love the body back in turn. There's a reciprocal loving relationship between the body and the cells and the parts of the body, which then just takes apart the dominator model, which is a fear-based model, which is what the history, as you mentioned, Riane, of mankind is. So that's the premise too. We're designed to be part of this body. And then premise 3 can sound kind of cliche because we've heard this so many times. Cliche means, though, it's being said a lot because a lot of people believe it's true. And that is that the more we give ourselves away, the better we feel. Now, and you could see how that would follow the design. Again, these things are kind of stacked 1, 2, 3 on top of each other. In my book, I give examples even of a billionaire, a guy named Ken Behring, who I got to work with a little, who had everything, even the NFL team and all the antique cars and mansions and all of the stuff, 737 private jet. And he never really found it until he turned 80. And then between 80 and 92, he lived to 92, he started his wheelchair foundation that was giving mobility to people all over the world, and also in the third world, helping families that were carrying those around. So it was family members also supporting those without mobility. He put a wheelchair in there, and bam, the person had mobility, and other family members could do the things that they wanted to do. And he said, I finally found it. All the treasure was mine. And I wasn't really feeling it. And bam, here it is, with my wheelchair foundation. And we all know, anecdotally, so many examples of this. And in Silicon Valley, I know the opposite too. Actually, I'm sure we all know a few of these stories where, boy, they had all the riches, and the yachts and all these things, and just not really very happy, really rather grumpy. We're just not designed, that way, is what I would contend. And again, scientists, Nassim Harriman, Resonance Science Foundation, he comes straight in with this. We are sovereign parts of one body, is the way he presents it from his research, which I think is true. And I think that, again, science is piling on now with this. So this has implications for all of this, because this builds a whole system initiative. This takes apart the dominator. Now we're more coming from loving presence. This brings in diversity and unity. All of these things, Riane, that you're talking about, these things that have created illness, dis-ease across our species, our young species here on this planet, where if these premises are true, there are implications for us in the hugest way, as individuals and as a collective, and when we look at our economy and as we look at business and how it evolves. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, actually, before we move ahead, I want to give Riane a chance actually now to respond for 2 reasons, because the cornerstones have actually teased out these generalities, which generally aren't seen. And also, you often say in your reports from neuroscience that it's been shown that the pleasure center of the brain reacts much more positively when you're in a community giving than when you're actually taking from someone or dominating from someone. So, Riane, how'd you like to respond to that before we move on to talking about the Conscious Business Declaration, which obviously focuses on as well?
I really, there's so many points that you've made, but I'll start with that. We have been taught either through the story of original sin or selfish genes, which are really the same story, aren't they? I mean, they fight each other, but again, it's a distraction. Because what's the story? We're bad, intrinsically, inevitably, have to be controlled from the top, God-fearing, etc. So, and the reality, as shown by both science and spirituality, is what you said, that we really are not bad. We have the possibility for uncaring, cruelty, lack of consciousness, destructiveness, but we also have such an enormous capacity for consciousness, for caring, for creativity. The problem is that for the last 5,000 to 10,000 years, we have been not only through violence, but also through our governing stories, our myths, because that's the fourth cornerstone. We have been taught untrue stories about who we really are as a species. And we internalize these stories, and economics, and this goes back again to changing not only how business operates within the current system, but how can we change the current system? And I'd love to talk more with you about that, so that it rewards exactly the kinds of behaviors that are more congruent with who we really are and what really gives us pleasure. I mean, Nurturing Our Humanity has all of these studies from neuroscience, from even studies show that people who giving, they feel better. They feel better than when they receive. I mean, the science is there, the spirituality, but the spirituality also has a dominator overlay. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The scriptures have a core of partnership teachings, and those are the ones that really do date back to before the last 5,000-10,000 years. But then they have this overlay, and it is racist, it is sexist, it is violent, brutally violent, and it's a domination overlay. So, but my work isn't just deconstruction, it's reconstruction. I'm very interested not just in what's wrong, which is what most of the conversation is about, but what do we need to rebuild to really, you speak of regenerative. I want to use cultures such as Çatalhöyük, which is really goes back to prehistory. And it was an early farming society, and it was more peaceful, no signs of destruction through warfare for over 1,000 years. It was more generally egalitarian, judging by the houses, the grave goods, and it was gender balanced. The archaeologist Ian Hodder, who was one of the major excavators of Çatalhöyük, wrote about this, saying that being born female and male really didn't make that much difference, judging from not only the grave goods and the houses, etc., but even judging from some of the biological evidence. And so that is a model. We don't want to go back to any good old days, but we have a model, and that model is what we have to recreate. And economics, and I will again repeat this, the metrics we use, and I'll really get back to that if I may later. And also, we have to change how we measure. We value what we measure, and we measure what we value. And we are not measuring the importance that neuroscience shows is essentially, if we are to have this human capacity development, this high quality human capital, if you want to use the language of economists. I don't like it because it objectifies us so much. I prefer saying human capacity development. And this is largely hinges on the, quote, women's work, coded women's work of caring for children and educating children in their early years. So we are really seeing that the shift to the post-industrial era, I mean, post-industrial, we certainly still have manufacturing, but the amount of people taken that needed for the manufacturing is a fraction, just as the amount of people that were needed when we shifted from the agrarian to the industrial society it became a fraction. And now with AI, my gosh, we're entering a whole brave new world. We cannot keep limping along with these old economic operating systems with their metrics and their rewards.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so it's a great segue then for us to then talk about the Conscious Business Declaration, because it would not be a declaration if it was not declaring a gigantic shift. And of course, Conscious Business Declaration has been a hallmark of Steve's work. Conscious Business Summit, Conscious Business Magazine, Conscious Business Certification, and recently the announcement of his accredited master's degree program in conscious business. So obviously that's this call for a shift. And so there are 9 major points to the Conscious Business Declaration, Steve, and maybe for the listeners, what you can do is give them an idea of what those 9 points are, and then we can have Riane respond about how those align actually with her vision and the 4 cornerstones as well. So Steve, tell us about the Conscious Business Declaration.
Yes, I will jump in and do that. And I first want to say just your analysis and research, of course, Riane, is so just spot on, where you've really looked down deep into all of these illnesses, and disease really across populations, the economy, how business operates. So you really, really take it apart, put your finger on these things that need healing. And where you talk about, of course, this whole gender area where alpha male has contributed in a substantial way to the problems that are here. And then you were just talking about how education, how we've been taught. Education has really set us off, has contributed to the problem, because the kind of education that was our education, going through grammar school, high school, college, second post-college, doesn't, as you mentioned, goes in all of these directions of measurement systems and old paradigms and all of these things. So where I want to go with this, and then I'm going to jump right into the Conscious Business Declaration, is, in Humanities Team, what we're doing is we're sharing, this is our Galileo moment. So, and it was a term that was kind of downloaded to me. I didn't really think about it. It just kind of dropped into my head. And so I went and I looked it up. What does Galileo moment mean? And so what I learned then is, we probably all know the Galileo story. This man in the 1500s, there in early 1600s, he develops his telescope based on what the Dutch had their research, and then became one of the first fathers of science, of physics, of astronomy. And of course, his research shared that, my gosh, ultimate reality as we understood it then was not true at all. That we thought that the universe was revolving around the Earth, right? It's called a geocentric understanding, right? And he said, hey, hello, it actually doesn't work that way. We're actually in a solar system, and we're revolving around a sun with other planets, and we're on the edge of the universe. Our solar system is. So it's not at all the Earth as the center, of the universe. And this was a very problematic. I said today, business is the most powerful institution. Well, the church was the most powerful institution then. He got himself in a whole lot of trouble, nearly got killed. He didn't. He was under house arrest to the end of his life. And that was only because he recanted there. They made him recant because he was going against canon, sacred text and science. But it was too late. Telescopes started getting out there. And the whole world very shortly could see, yes, it was true, all these things that Galileo shared. Now, so this is an example of one man standing up and being brave and really changing the world. Now, we're talking about today education not serving us, this regurgitation education with these focuses on measurement systems and the lack of diversity and all of these things that has created a mess. Our education as well in science was really on the physical body. All things true, that at the end of our life, our physical body goes to bones and dust and 6 feet under. There's nothing untrue about that. But that's the least consequential thing that we could be learning about the body and the universe. What's more important is what's coming in now, this bridge of science and spirituality that's saying, no, it's a spiritual universe. It's one presence. We're offspring or emanations is maybe a better word of the one. Then with all of these other things that we're getting to, its basis actually is love. And then spiritual energy now brings us straight over to energy. It brings us actually to a vibrational universe, because to be in a spiritual universe, it's all about vibration. Lower vibration, we're sick, we're not thinking very well, it's dense, etc. As we raise our vibration through food, the things we look at, the clothes we wear, our thoughts, words, and actions, as we raise our vibration, we get real healthy. Actually, what happens, a nice metaphor we can use as we come into flow is it's like being on a raft, where now we're on a raft above the whole physical world that's very roller coastery, a good day, a bad day, the dense kind of thinking, which I experienced growing up until I became conscious. And then once as I was deepening my own conscious journey, I felt this flow thing. I even feel it right now, where I'm more on a raft, just kind of floating above that. Still with all the challenges that I used to have. There are plenty of challenges, but I feel about them differently. I address them differently. I sleep well. I don't get in that roller coaster thing that I used to be in. Today, bringing it back to Galileo moment, what we're saying is that this new science, where this bridge of science and spirituality are bringing in these whole new understandings that are incredibly important, that we've got to add to these earlier understandings. It's not that they were untrue, the physical body, it's just that they were very, very incomplete. And as we understand, our awareness embraces these new understandings, and then as we embody and express them, as we live into them, that's where then all these things that Riane is bringing in that have been the history of mankind here on the planet, that's where we start bringing healing and remedy to them. So, and this is now what the Conscious Business Declaration is about. So the Conscious Business Declaration, we created it in 2015, Humanities Team. We reached out to the Club of Budapest, Urban Laszlo, the Goi Peace Foundation in Japan, Fowler Center as an agent of change at Case Western Reserve University. So 4 NGOs came together to create the Conscious Business Declaration. And its basis is what we're talking about here, this interdependent, interconnected, actually one, I'm called it a universal consciousness animating and permeating all of life, this one presence where business embraces spirituality and science. And it's saying that where we see this as true, our highest priority has to be serving life. It has to. It's that whole where cells in the body of life. How could we just chase the top and bottom line growth, this whole materialistic thing that's harming life, fouling our planet? How can we do that when we understand we're a part of the body? The optical delusion is gone. It's been healed. We see the connection, the oneness. It's what we're going to naturally do if we're healthy and mature. So the Conscious Business Declaration then is built around this understanding that we're one with this planet that we live on. And of course, other things are going to naturally come into transparency instead of opaque type models. It's what, a body's going to be open. It's going to be sharing. It's going to be heart-centered. These are things that we naturally do as we're living into, as we're embodying and embracing what this connection and oneness are. So these are key features there. And throughout the Oneness Declaration, it keeps coming back to, so the business is focusing on health and well-being. It's focusing on healing. It's focusing on, so it's a two-step process as you found a business. I was an entrepreneur myself, used to be entrepreneurs. Oh, there's a need which requires a product or service. I'll fill it and I'm going to make a bunch of money. Well, as we're conscious, there's this second thing that comes in, which is, oh, there's a need. And we say, now, if I fill that need with a product or service, am I going to create a healthier planet, healthier communities, healthier homes? And if the answer is no, we have no interest whatsoever in filling that need. Because again, the highest priority is to serve life. We're a part of life. We understand we actually have everlasting life. We bring in some of these spiritual dimensions. We have unlimited potential, all of these things. So we're living into that. And we're creating a culture then that's living into that. And that's its own discussion, which we may or may not have time to get into. But that's what this one conscious business declaration is getting into, these things that we're one, that our focus is on health and well-being, that there's transparency, and it's ending then in its final provision or clause with, and where we follow all of these things, then we can really create healthy businesses and a healthy planet. Going back to my train metaphor, now we've got a lead car that's pulling this train in the direction that we want it to go in. And it's incredibly important that that happen, because again, where we're saying we're on this journey to a sustainable and flourishing planet, we must do that. Business can't be on the side still chasing top and bottom line growth with all of these things that Riane's bringing in, all of these things that are illness and disease everywhere.
I'm really very curious about where your master's in conscious business. What institution is that housed in?
Yes. So, and we just relaunched the Conscious Business Change Agent Program. It's a 9-month program. And we've got just a terrific guy, Dr. Larry Clay, who I know Kurt knows, who's also a part of the Evolutionary Leaders, who's leading that group. And then we're working with Jim Garrison and Ubiquity University, then the accredited master's degree for those that want to go further, write the dissertation and get the master's degree. So, and that's all launching right now. We're actually just out promoting that program now, but where we're putting conscious business change agents out in the world that are deeply familiar with all of these things. And Chris Laszlo, there's so many. Riane, you should be part of the faculty. Maybe we'll get you to create a few video trainings that are part of it.
That's a very good idea. I'd like to do that. I still believe that while action on the individual level is essential to bring about the change, that we need to change the metrics and the reward system. Because otherwise we will be like so many of these wonderful cooperatives on the margin. And what I would like to, I think that we almost, climate change, which is progressing much faster than we ever thought before. Just in the last few weeks, I see it as a kind of our moment of awakening. Even some of the people who have been in denial, but not all of them, because denial is built into domination systems. Climate change denial, election result denial, COVID denial. It starts, as I elaborate, in nurturing our humanity very early, largely in domination families, where you deflect your pain and your anger, and basically are denying the reality that a lot of your pain is being caused by the people on whom you depend on. So it's a survival mechanism. And fortunately, not everybody gets stuck there. I mean, that's the good news. Okay. And for those people who aren't stuck there, we have to give them a positive alternative. And so we have been developing, well, in the Real Wealth of Nations, I introduced what I call a new economics that, of course, includes business, the market, but a free market. And you mentioned transparency, which is so interesting because I introduced new words like hierarchies of actualization as against hierarchies of domination. I mean, we need parents, we need teachers, we need managers, we need leaders, but power is not conceptualized as power over, but as power with and power to unleashing our creative power. And I think that with AI, I mean, I'm being somewhat nonlinear, we're also at a point, I mean, we're told by nature that, hey, we either change or it's curtains. So this is a very interesting moment. But also AI, loud and clear, is telling us that the old business theories are not applicable. I mean, what are we educating people to do? What are we educating people for? And I am with you there. We need to educate people to be decent, real human beings. You know that the most basic human yearning is a yearning for caring connection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can't survive without it. Babies who are fed and, whatever, but it's not done with some degree of care, of love. They have tremendously damage to their brains. Their brains are smaller. I mean, it's all in nurturing our humanity. So what we're talking about is beginning to explore not only the piecemeal change, but what are the interventions that are really going to make a difference. And I think one such intervention is new metrics. And we have GDP and GNP, which, as I said, well, it's a ludicrous because under productive work, they lump everything, whether it kills us or whether it makes us flourish. I mean, what? I mean, selling cigarettes, fast foods, and the resulting medical bills and the resulting funeral bills, they all make GDP go up. I mean, so it's a totally crazy measure. And it does not include the work of the 3 life-sustaining sectors that are outside of the market. So if we introduced in 2014 with a grant from the Kellogg's Foundation, the first iteration of what we called social wealth economic indicators. And our premise, well, I'll go to sort of the end of one of the things that we found. We drew mostly from existing data. In fact, we drew completely from existing data. We didn't have the money to really do anything else. But there is a lot of data, but putting it in a different frame is what made the difference. So and we use mostly EOC data because it's more robust and it is also more available for that iteration. And one of the things we found, for example, is that the United States invests less than every well-to-do so-called developed nation in support for families. And not coincidentally, the United States has the highest infant mortality rate, the highest maternal mortality rate, and the highest child poverty rate of any major developed nation. Now, I think that when you are looking at complex systems, you cannot just do the thing of linear cause and effect. You really have to look at the interconnections. I mean, we're right back to the theme, always the same theme.
Yeah,
and real systems work is looking at the interconnections, just like the four cornerstones of childhood family, of gender, with its gendered system of values, of economics, and of story and language are interconnected, as is the in-group versus out-groups, racism, anti-Semitism, anti-sexual, or anybody who isn't of a certain sexual orientation, you name it. I mean, and it relates completely to what what attracts me is we're trying to really move towards a partnership spirituality, which for me is putting love into action. I mean, that's it. So, but we came up with 52 indicators. Because we not only did inputs, but also outputs. Because, most so-called GDP alternatives just look at outputs. It's a snapshot of what is, rather than also looking at what are the inputs and what inputs make for better outputs. And now we are seeking funding for really re-examining, because this was an ad hoc kind of a thing that we did. I mean, we worked with the Urban Institute, we did a meeting with top economists in Washington, D.C., et cetera, but now we're at a place where there's a real urgency for this becoming a major project. And I'm mentioning it to you because I think it would be a perfect partnership with conscious business, frankly.
Yeah, no question. I love you're really out ahead this whole area of social health economic indicators, which I have read of this. I haven't read it in a while, but it's a great great contribution, because as you mentioned, I mean, GDP, my gosh, these economic indicators we have are just crazy. Let me bring in Neil and I also just this week, we're starting, as we're launching our Conscious Business Change Agent program, relaunching it. We're also launching a new free program called Accelerating Your Conscious Evolution, then a masterclass called The Art and Science of Living Consciously. Now, and inside of this masterclass that we're launching, we have some things that would be considered radical in today's world, but that fit with the kinds of things we're talking about here, Riane. One is that there's actually no such thing as ownership. Of course, the indigenous people have shared this for eons, right? But if this is a holistic universe, holistic and fractal universe, if it's a spiritual universe, if it's a vibrational universe, if there's everlasting life in this, ownership actually doesn't really have a place. It's really more about creating common usage, and so that people have access to facilities, to that which supports life. Also, there's no such thing as competition. How could you have competition inside of a body where it's not just golden rule of treat you as I would treat myself. It's actually, we're cells in a common body. We're actually one. So, and if we don't understand that in this physical realm, I can tell you for sure we will in the non-physical realm when we return to it. And the only reason I can say that for sure is I work with the mediums and the near-death experience people all day long. And you work around these people all day long. Dr. Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven, just created one of our recent master classes. His book, Proof of Heaven, was a New York Times bestseller. He has good standing even in academic and research circles. And then the mediums, the James Van Pragues and Karen Noes and Suzanne Giesmans, where there's just this evidence coming back all day long of afterlife that is here, angels and guides, loved ones that are still here. So it just creates the context then for life as we know it. We're now, as we lift the veil, this is even going beyond what Albert Einstein brought in of just optical delusion. Now there's physical and non-physical realms, which incidentally, Nassim Harameyn's research, and here on August 5th, he's doing this 90-minute program. You may know he's in the lead up now to his unified field research, which he brought that into our masterclass called Forbidden Science. This gets into everything from quantum scale to cosmological objects, everything physical and non-physical, and his science is to 13 decimal points. So 0.0000. I mean, it's astonishing science. It's what Einstein was working on at the time of his passing. He for over a decade this was his research, but back in his time, they didn't have all of the tools and the science to get him there. I believe we're there now, where in its physical and non-physical realms. So this gets us to it's a kind of a radically different world where we bring in things like no such thing as ownership. There's no competition. Certainly, as you mentioned, measurement systems. We're certainly not going to be looking at just GDP and product and services that are sold. My God, this is dinosaur, and hopefully we're rapidly moving into this new world. We would love. So I'll follow up with you, Riane, after this program. We would love to bring in your research and findings. These 52 indicators that you were talking about. Would love to bring that into our program.
Yeah, so absolutely. It's interesting. We're moving on now toward about 50 minutes, so we'll need to start to wrap up. But as I was listening, what I was seeing in common here, it's interesting that both the Conscious Business Declaration and the Four Cornerstones were the call for a radical change in direction. They were an epiphany that what had been is not working, and there has to be a fundamental change in direction. And then also that if both of you are being looked at as like doctors in the sense of what doctors do, you were both giving very clear diagnoses and then beginning to give the prescriptions that you'd give from those diagnoses. So that's kind of how I'd like to end, is if you were going to summarize what your prescriptions would be for the future that would work in the holistic ways that you're talking about, how would business and economics look in that new world, let's say, compared to what is in the old paradigm that's obviously not working? And of course, you could go on forever about that, but to try to maybe each take a turn at giving that hopeful look of where we could make a big turn of the corner in a really meaningful way. So maybe we'll start with Steve, and that way Riane can wrap up after Steve is done.
Well, I really think that this is smell the coffee time. We've been sharing even in these last couple of weeks the drumbeat, as we look at currents in the seas, as we're looking at extreme weather, as we're looking at Ukraine war with what that could be, as we're looking at age-old injustice and inequalities, and these things Riane's bringing in, these where diversity has been marginalized. As we look at these things, we're hearing it and seeing it. The Great Resignation, right? You've got the Generation X and Z and Alpha, and these younger people saying, I don't want to just work where there's no meaning and purpose. And even my generation, boomers, I see a lot of boomers, same thing, post-COVID of, I want meaning, I want purpose, I want to live into my deeper values. So I think we're being called to a new way of living now. I think we're actually well into this great shift of the ages that, and we don't have time to talk about evidence of that, but I think there's plenty of evidence of that we're in that shift. If it's true what this unified field research shares, that it's physical and non-physical, that we are sovereign to one body, and we're designed that way, it shares we're going to walk into a beautiful new world if we're going to pay attention to what is so, that our young species here on this planet, we're maturing up, and we're going to come into these new understandings. And coming into the new understandings is just the beginning. Awareness, what good is awareness? Awareness alone is like having a fantastic meal on the table and looking at it and never eating it, right? What's the if we're going to come into these fantastic new understandings, my God, we want to eat this meal. We want to embody this awareness, these teachings. We want to express it. Come into these loving ways of being. with all of the things that we're talking about here, which inform life and new measurement systems and new processes. And we're going to see that we're actually living just into a small chapter of our everlasting life while we're here. And my God, with what's going on in the world now, if that's true, why would we not stretch into our most conscious self, our most loving self in our homes, in our communities, in our world, in business, which is what we're talking about here. Yes, in business. We spend a lot of our lives in business. Why would we want to sit in business that's doing often this whole crazy top line, bottom line thing that's creating all this illness on the planet? So I'm hopeful. As I say that, there is a ginormous amount to be done, but not a sky is falling type. What good does that do? This conscious energy that I speak of, where it's sort of I describe it as a raft, and we're not in the roller coaster, good day, bad day. That's the energy we want to be in. That's that new consciousness that Einstein's talking about, where we're elevating consciousness. I went to Silicon Valley thinking, the American dream really was resident there. I left because it wasn't. It wasn't. It was a mirage. Oasis was always out on the horizon. I left it. I found it though. I found it in this conscious living, in this conscious journey. We can live on any place on the planet, and we can find it. We can live on this raft, so to speak, where we're in flow, and then create this way of living that we're talking about here, including in business, especially in business. And so for viewers here, boy, go support Riane's work. Invite you to support our work and become a conscious business change agent. Now's our moment, and let's do it.
Yeah, amen. That's a declaration. And everybody, if you want to read more about this, Steve's book, A New Universal Dream, My Journey from Silicon Valley to a Life in Service to Humanity. That's his book. That's just a couple months old, and many, many people reading it. So please do. So Riane, we'll give you a chance then to sum up.
Well, I want to pick up where you were, which is from awareness to action and to systemic change, because otherwise we really are on the fringe. We need to eat, we need a roof over our heads, and if the reward system still does not recognize the importance of the work of caring for people, which has been coded feminine, caring for our environment, including our planetary environment, which neither capitalism nor socialism do. So for me, a first step is new indicators. Another tool that we have worked on, and I do want to talk to you about the indicators some more, because I think that developing 52, it's too much for people to get. So we're working on an index, which may or may not be the answer. And I think AI has something to contribute to that with a new algorithm. We need to use the new technology in positive ways, which takes me to a second tool, which is as kind of a self-inventory of where are we mentally, and in our families, and in our workplaces, and in our communities, and in our businesses, on this partnership domination social scale. It is neither Republican or Democrat. It goes way beyond both. But this said, I too am hopeful. It's an existential commitment, that we make. That even though we see the rise of strongman rule, a return to that, which happens in periods of severe and rapid change, particularly technological change. But we have to present people with positive alternatives, not escape, but changing the system. And that's what my work is about. The first few books I wrote, The Chalice and the Blade, which, by the way, is now in 57 US printings and about almost 30 foreign editions, Sacred Pleasure, and then going all the way to Nurturing Our Humanity, and of course, Real Wealth of Nations, was to then try to see, well, what are the interventions? And the reason I focus on economics and the Real Wealth of Nations is, like you, I see this as really an area that we must transform in order for us to live the way that we want to live, and that our human nature actually calls for us to live as. So I think that we need to live with one foot in what is, because we need to survive and eat and have a roof over our heads. But at the same time, we need to change that. And the only way to change it is by changing the rules of the game, changing the reward system, and changing consciousness is the first step. But consciousness has to lead to action. And that is how, as a systems person, I think that it's time for us to connect the dots, to include huge dots, like children, like women, as part of the equation, and then to connect them, because, and I'll end with that, because the people who are pushing us back, whether it was Hitler in Nazi Germany, or Stalin in the former Soviet Union, or Khomeini, post-Khomeini's Iran, or the Taliban, or Putin in Russia now, or Trump, they all want to go back to the domination system. And Trump actually said, it's all about domination. And that's where his consciousness is. And the fact is that it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Riane Eisler and Steve Farrell. It's great that you two have met. Now you're aware of each other. I think wonderful things are going to come from that. And thanks for joining us here on the foundational questions of our time and the role of economics and business. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Riane Eisler, and to our viewers. Each of the subsequent videos in this important video series will feature global thought leaders and activists discussing their work in the context of the Four Cornerstones with Dr. Eisler. And you can update yourself regularly on the series at the websites that will be posted just hereafter. And these include lightonlight.us, centerforpartnership.org, evolutionaryleaders.net. Thank you for joining us, and please tell your colleagues about this important video series. This is Dr. Kurt Johnson of Light on Light Media and of the Synergy Circles of the Evolutionary Leaders, a project of the Source of Synergy Foundation. And please also see our emerging work at holomovement.org. That's HOLO movement.org.